Welcome to the Guidelight podcast. I'm your host, Jason Trent, and I'm very excited about the series of podcasts we're about to do around one of our Guidelight pathways, which is stewardship. And this is actually going to drill down around the topic of generosity, and I'm excited to have my dear friend back, Mink, and he's going to join us in this discussion. Jay brings a rare combination to these three episodes. He's got the theology of a man who thinks deeply about biblical generosity. He's got the practitioner's eye of a deal advisor who sat across the table from business owners in their most consequential financial moments of their lives. And he also does the daily work as a regional leader at the National Christian Foundation. And they're an organization that has mobilized more than $25 billion for the kingdom causes since 1982. Yes, I said $25 billion. NCF exists at the intersection of faith and financial complexity. They help people give non-cash assets like business interests, real estate, and stock strategically in ways that maximize kingdom impact while minimizing tax burdens. Jay's role is not theoretical. He walks alongside givers and advisors in real time, helping them build giving strategies anchored in a biblical view of stewardship. That means Jay has seen generosity at its most structured and its most raw. He knows what it looks like when a business owner finally connects theology to transaction. He also knows what it looks like when they don't. That's who we want to show up in these conversations. So let's go get it. Hey, welcome everybody to the Guidelight podcast. I'm Jason Trent. You probably just heard my intro. I was telling Jay, I was like, man, you got this great intro that I pre-recorded. So he didn't get to hear it, but he'll have to watch the podcast and see. So Jay, my friend, welcome, brother from another mother, as I always like to say. Glad you're here. Hey, today, everyone, we've got a great topic, and I think we talked about that on the intro already, generosity. And so Jay, I'm going to shoot it straight. We're just going to get right into it. How's that sound?
Let's go.
All right. So, Jay, we've talked about you. This isn't your first time being on here. So, if prior listeners probably know, you work with National Christian Foundation. You've come across really and sat with some of the most generous people in the country. We've talked about that, and it's great. And I guess most of them at some point, they had to cross a line from believing God owns it all to actually living that way. And I'll just say, because like I've always said, as a business owner, God, this is your business. You own it all. And so a lot of Christ following business owners would say that. But, and we'll just talk in the context a little bit in the world of mergers and acquisitions, when someone is ready to start giving or they come across, a big check because they sold their business, that's where the rubber meets the road. And I'm sure you've encountered that a little bit. And for listeners that don't know, Jay worked with me when we sold our business, and he probably encountered that. He might not say anything, but he probably saw that in me, because I know I struggled. I'll be transparent. I struggled with me saying it's all God's. And then when you start looking at the numbers, it's like, oh, and your flesh starts to come out a little bit. So anyways, Jay, you've seen that. Tell me a little bit about what that looks like. And no, you don't have to use me as the poster child, but what that looks like when someone really says, hey, he owns it all, and then they're ready to start making big checks, and then they're like, ugh, I'm gonna backpedal.
Yeah, a great point. I think the struggle that you just shared a little bit of is very common, right? Like, our flesh and the world, like foisting a certain lifestyle aspiration on us, and the enemy, like the combination of those three that are opposed to the kingdom of God and the Holy Spirit within us, those come to bear. I mean, it's just part of the journey and the experience of processing what does generosity look like? What is God calling me to do? I think the question you're asking, it's obviously in relation to like actual giving, but I think it's a bigger question, really. It's really about discipleship, you know, um, like, who serves whom, and what is the difference between faith and action, right? It's like, wouldn't it Peter says, I think, or James was like, hey, show me your faith about what you do, James. Thank you. Show me your faith about what you say. I'm going to show you about what I do. And there's some merit to that, right? Like, it's like, that's pretty compelling. And oftentimes I'm convicted by a comment like that. I remember this is an often used, it's been used countless times over the years, illustration of this really famous tightrope walker, right? This guy was like unbelievable, a generational talent. He, once walked on a tightrope, sat down in the middle, cooked himself an omelet, and ate it. Right, like he went across the. Seriously, I mean, that's crazy. I think it was French, right? It had to be an omelet. But he walked across Niagara Falls, and he did it with a wheelbarrow with 200 pounds in it, and so he came back and the that completes the tightrope act, and there's a huge crowd. They're like applauding. You're amazing. This is incredible. We've never seen anything like it. And he's like, yeah, who thinks I could do this with a live person? You just saw me do it with 200 pounds in the wheelbarrow. Who thinks I could do it? And everyone's like, yes, of course you could do it, right? And then it's like, okay, who's volunteering? Nobody, right? And that's the rub. I mean, that's what Christ calls us to as followers, right? It's like it's one thing for us to know what we should do, and it's another for us to put it into practice. It's like the essential core, I think, that is exactly what Jesus was getting after when he interacted with the rich young ruler, right? Like right before that, the disciples are trying to like stop parents from bringing their kids to Jesus to bless. And he's like, no, 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 don't stop them. For such as these belong the children of the kingdom of heaven, right? So it's like that simple, like absolute trust, like dependence, on God is what all of us are called to. And then literally the next story is like rich young ruler who goes away sad because he had great wealth, and Jesus hit him where it hurt. He said like, hey, he said he loved him, right? He loved that guy. And Jesus kind of recounts the second half of the Ten Commandments, like don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery. He's like, yeah, all these things I've done from the time I'm young. He's like, all right, one thing you lack, sell all you have. He doesn't say like love the Lord with all your heart. He says sell all you have, and come and follow me. And that, so it's like literally Jesus is like, get in the wheelbarrow. It's time to get in. And you know, he went away sad. And here's the rub. It's like I know for myself, there's been lots of times throughout my Christian life that I've been confronted with a situation where it's like get in the wheelbarrow, and I'm like, I'm good, or like this is like it's too much. It's asking too much of me, or I don't have the time for it, or whatever it might be. And it doesn't have to be like monumental things. It can be smaller things. But I do think that Paul talks about the process of sin, right? And how it starts little and it gets bigger and it metastasizes, it grows and it like gives birth and it like leads to death. And I think that is true for the transfer of head knowledge versus heart knowledge, head theology versus heart theology, like just theoretic theology versus practical street level theology. How do I live this stuff out actually? How am I actually living it? The little things, the little spots where I give up can have an effect down the road on the bigger area of how I live out my faith. And so, sorry for the long-winded response, but like I do think that generosity, like how we exercise um, stewardship and joy amidst generosity, is probably directly proportional to the source of our generosity. So I'll say it a different way. Like like if you love the Charlotte Panthers, right? You're a Carolinas Panther fan because Lord knows you live in North Carolina and you need to be a Carolinas Panther fan. If you're not already, I'm sending you a t-shirt or something. But I love the Panthers. And they're like consistently inconsistent. They make it hard to love them, which I kind of appreciate. I'm like, okay, we've been to the Super Bowl twice, kind of botched it both times, but that's okay. And I'll run across another Panther fan, and we can get along. We can be buddies, and we can talk and have a good time. But it really revolves around Panthers football. Watching the game, talking about stats, trades, draft picks, the management, whatever it might be. And we could go to games and have a great time. But when we exhaust our Panther conversation, right, that's the end of our relationship. Like the depth of our relationship is directly tied to the object of our relationship. And I think that's really true. I see that all the time with people that give small amounts, large amounts, wealthy people to like average Joes. The depth of our generosity, the joy in our generosity, is directly tied to the object of our generosity. And if that's Jesus, if that's like the transformative power of Jesus in your life, then it affects how you give. And I don't say that. I'm never saying any of this stuff in a prescriptive way or a convicting way, though I love to agitate and encourage. Okay, because like the reality is, if you're an average Christian, and let's say you're giving, and the tithe thing is, that's a great starting point. That's nothing wrong with 10%. Giving 10%, that's a lot compared to what most Americans give. The average is like 2 to 3%, maybe something like that for generosity. So, like, already you're different and operating very differently than the rest of the world. So that's good, and there's room for improvement probably, and not in a works way, though we know from James works ain't bad, But I think in a devotion way, like when I'm really living out my faith more and dialed in a little more, filled with the Spirit, walking better in step with the Spirit, let's say in my marriage. Well, I'm serving my wife, I'm loving her more, I'm like taking time for her to hear whatever this crazy story she's got to tell me, or with all the details that I don't need, or like whatever it might be. And and that's true for every facet of life, including generosity.
Well, and there's a couple points you made. I just want to kind of go back to. I like when you were talking about the object of of your faith, or the object of that commonality.
Yeah.
And when you look at, so many worship songs we sing on Sunday mornings talking about Jesus being our all in all, and just,
Mm-hmm.
all I need is Jesus. I mean, just and I'm not saying that's not true in that given moment or whatever, but you also pointed out, the risk. You're talking about what risk. Are you going to get in the wheelbarrow? And I think when it comes to our faith and our faith journey, and in this context, generosity, but like you said, it can apply to all facets of it. Is what is it going to cost you, right? So, like, again, if you just look at monetarily things, if I'm, giving 10%, but now, God's challenging you to 20%, well, I've got to give something up. What is that other
Mm-hmm.
10% I've
Mm-hmm.
given? What am I willing to sacrifice? And he calls us to that
Mm-hmm.
lifestyle of sacrifice. And I like what you said, not prescriptive, but what is the Holy Spirit telling you to do? Like,
Yep.
what is the Lord doesn't need our money. It's always for us. I mean, any person I've ever talked to that has grown in their generosity, they realize they're closer to the Lord because of it. It it's
Mm-hmm.
it's not about the money. Whatever they would give up, whatever they leaned into, they were more blessed by it. I got to share this one quick story because it just happened this week, and I get teared up on this motion because God used it and is, kind of apropos because we're doing this podcast. Is there's a gentleman that has been doing some work. He came with another crew of a friend of mine. We've been doing some work on our farm, and really just like the guy. He loves the Lord. Amazing testimony. I won't go through all that. Probably need to have him on this podcast sometime because he's just that straight of a guy. But he's a guy that comes from very little means,
Mm-hmm.
very little means, and has had kind of a rough turn of things. And I knew the guy I hired paid him well, so I knew he was paid well. But I'm just gonna give him a tip. He's been on my property for a few days, so we are talking. Handed him, $300 extra. Said, "Here's,
Mm-hmm.
man, just we appreciate you."
Mm-hmm.
And he was extremely thankful and all this kind of stuff. Well, he was come back to do a little small job, and he's so humble too. He listens to the Lord. He wasn't, and what I'm about to share. He wasn't sharing out of any boasting. You just tell in the spirit. He was just sharing as a blessing to let him know how that $300 was spent. Because we just talk about ministry and stuff. I just love the guy. He said, "Well, I just want to let you know." He goes, "Man, you don't know how big of a blessing that $300 was." And he didn't say, "Hey, I was able to, you know, get my pantry filled, or I was able to do this." He says, "Man, this single mom that I know was struggling, and she was sharing something with me. We're struggling to pay rent." He
Mm-hmm.
said, "I gave her $100," and she says, "That's just enough." The very next day, he said this young guy, he'd been kind of discipling a little bit, getting pushing closer to the Lord, was just on hard times. He was talking to me because I don't even have any food in my pantry. I mean, I just can't imagine, like, no food in my pantry at all.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "Come by my house." He goes, "I got $100 for you." Gave him
Mm,
$100. I was so thankful. Hey, I spent $84 and I was able to put the other $16 in my gas tank. And it was just like, wow, you look at this, I get choked up. And someone said, I said, well, Will, you ain't got two nickels rubbed together either. What are you doing giving this money away? He goes, man, the good Lord takes care of me. He
mm,
has all my provisions already spoken for. If
mm-hmm,
I hear someone in need, I'm going to take care of them.
mm,
And it just warmed my heart. It reminds me, obviously, we all know the parable of the old widow with the mina that she just puts in that one little coin, and God says, "Man, she gave more than that rich guy that's boasting about his 10%, even,
yep,
because
yep,
the other guy gave out of his poverty, the other guy gave out of his affluence." And when you see that happen in the real world, it chokes you up and it challenges you because 90% of it, or I mean, a lot of Americans are just blessed way more than we deserve when we compare ourselves to other parts of the world.
yep,
I'm not minimizing the struggles that a lot of people go through financially,
right.
but when we start counting our blessings of what God does provide.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and thanks for sharing that story. I mean, it's funny. It's a blessing to talk with other brothers and sisters because the reality is, hearing a story like that of this guy giving away the money you gave him, so that he could help other people when he probably needed some help too, like that's convicting, right? Like that makes me want to give more. That makes me wonder, like, why am I, like, allowing money to kind of run my life and get soaked up in all these other things that you know aren't joy producing. Just kind of keeping up with all the things. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's good.
So, all right, so this kind of there's another question, and I think you and I have talked about this before, just on the sidebar, but maybe not because I just here in recent years, people have brought this up, but like, what is enough? What amount is enough for, and it's a personal question for each one of us. And I'm not asking you personally right now, but I know I've went through my journey of enough, and quite frankly, I'm still in that journey because I'm wanting to lay it out to the Lord. And we're like, when you really surrender that to the Lord, are you ready for what he says?
Yeah,
And I had my number, to be transparent, but now I'm like, God, I want to put
that's
that
not
back before
enough.
you. Yeah, no, no, it's the other way around, to be transparent. It's like, I had my number that's the thing. Like the number I had, I knew it would be comfortable. In my mind, I felt like I'd be secure in that. And I'm kind of like, God, that doesn't sound like you're in that because he's probably going to press me. He's probably going to challenge me. He's going to I didn't feel like it cost me a whole lot when I set that number. And I feel like when we do that, if we want to build our faith, if we really want to trust in him, if we're really going to answer that question of what is enough, and like I said, he might come back and say, "You're good, Jason," or he might say, "You know what? I even got more for you." I don't know, like because at the same time, I don't want to make this a poverty issue to where like we all need to go out there and just live on. By no means, I don't think that's it, but it's just the idea of what is enough. And I want to. You may speak to this, but I mean the Barnharts. I mean, you and I know that story, that testimony very well, and every time I hear that, I'm like, I need to go back and revisit, this with the Lord. But I'm gonna turn it over to you now, because I mean, in your journey, whether it's your own personal testimony or what you've seen, obviously tons of, because I know you've walked through that with a lot of people on what is enough. Give me a little bit of your feedback and what you've seen.
Well, and it's interesting because the way you framed it, or I guess the question you're asking yourself as you're considering that, most people kind of do ask the question in the vein of like, how much is enough that I know that I could be really comfortable? Like my lifestyle aspirations or vision, my God given role and responsibility to protect and provide, is met, and like, okay, that's a good number, and and then the plan is I'll give away everything else. Like that's the common approach. I like, and I'm challenged by your processing of like, hey, maybe the number needs to be a little bit less, and that be a bit of a challenge for me. Like, where I'm like, it's not also. So that's really cool. I do think it's interesting. Like, the Bible is very clear. We're called to plan. We're called to save. That's good stewardship. I think it's a matter, when we start talking about what's enough, it's a matter of your heart. Like, who are you ultimately trusting in? Because the Bible also says, hey, money can sprout wings and fly away. And like, so That's true. Like I've seen it in times in my life where I've had a bunch and then it's like gone out the door real quick, and then the Lord might lead us through a season of scarcity, and then all of a sudden the blessing comes back in, and and I'm not sure it's tied. Sometimes people, I default to probably bad theology of like, oh, God must be punishing me or disciplining me, in times of scarcity. But we know He prunes those He loves, and that might not even be out of like a sin pattern. It could be just like, no, no, you're doing great. I want to prune you. Like you're flourishing. So here comes the pruning. It's like that doesn't, I don't love that concept, but that is maybe how a good God treats his beloved children. What is enough? I think there's really two good applications for that question. One is in annual income. So depending on your life stage, right? Like if you're like in earning years, you got kids and all, saving for college and all that sort of stuff. Well, again, prayerfully and thoughtfully looking at your budget and all the things you got, your income and the outflow, like what might be enough for expenses or for savings or the combination of those two on a monthly basis. And then you're giving away the excess. Like that might create some room to increase your generosity. So there's that. And a lot of people don't really think about it in income form. Usually the question is more like nest egg. What's that one big number that would be enough? I would know I'm good to go after that. And that's a appropriate one too. And I think that tangential to that question, or kind of dovetailing in with it, is the question of like, well, is God providing and enhancing my income to increase my standard of living, or is he providing and enhancing income over the years to potentially increase my standard of giving? Like what might that look like? But unless there's like like God, Jesus has saved us to be radically generous, right? Like he is generosity. Everything about the gospel and our salvation is greatly generous. We got something for nothing. We didn't earn it. We never will, despite my best efforts. And like, so he's calling us to that. It's like scandalous generosity, the gospel. Um, late Tim Keller once said, it's like promiscuously generous. Tim Keller said that we were, perhaps saved to be promiscuously generous. And I kind of like, when I heard him say that, I'm like, ooh, I love that. That's like, a little sensational, like being like promiscuously generous sounds really fun. And so, I think on National Christian Foundation's website, there's an article about creating a financial finish line. There's a finish line pledge. So you go to finishlinepledge.com, and there's a calculator on there that helps people think through creating a financial finish line. It's a a movement, I guess, in the same vein of like creating that to be generous, like it's faith based. So that might be a good tool for folks to check out, the finishlinepledge.com, and play with the idea and dream a little bit and really engage the Lord. Hey, God, what do you want me to do?
Those are great resources and tools, and thanks for that insight on the enough. And so, like I said, just I love what you said before, though. In all this, I think it's woven throughout is when it comes to generosity or just any of our callings in our life, where's your heart at, right? It's all about a heart issue with your relationship with
Yep.
your father, and letting him have free reign in that.
And here's one more thing I'll throw out too on finish lines or numbers, all that sort of stuff. Clearly, the word says that he's a lamp to our feet, right? So if you start thinking about the nest egg number, well, stuff could happen between now and 30 years from now that could fundamentally affect and change what that nest egg number, that finish line number needs to be. Needs to be out of your God-given role to protect and provide. So, like, but lamp to our feet, like, all right, Lord, well, what are you calling me today? And then give yourself the grace and freedom to allow it to change. There's no sin in that. Not it could be, but not necessarily, so I mean, I think that that's a, it's for freedom that Christ set us free. So it's like, hey, we got freedom
Amen.
to play around with this stuff and pray and dream and engage God's heart.
So I was wanting to. So there's a scripture that I like a lot. Psalm 24:1. It says, "The earth is the Lord's, and all it contains, the world, and those who dwell in it."
Mm,
So, that whole concept that everything is his, right? I mean, we hear that a lot when we talk about the tithe. I've heard pastors say, well, well, that's the old covenant. Well, the new covenant, it's all his, right? So it's kind of one of those things where, we kind of play on that. But really, that understanding, and we've talked about it here on this podcast a lot, we have these 7 Guidelight pathways, and one of those is stewardship. And so this obviously falls in line with that. But in the grander scheme of stewardship, it really is that fundamental understanding that we are just stewards of everything. We really own nothing. We control nothing in the grand scheme of time and eternity and in this world. It's all His. And so, like, who are we to say, this is ours? Or it's I think it's that control issue, and it goes back to, that heart issue. And so, like I said, you've worked with a lot of individuals, a lot of business owners that have done exits or just in general giving. It's not all tied around, mergers and acquisition, but what have you seen when it comes to either people shifting or addressing or just coming up against that understanding that it's all his? And when you have that mindset, like, there's, like you said, there's freedom in that. Like, it's like, it's not mine. It's like, it's easy to be generous. It's easy to give away because you just say, well, it's not mine. Like, what does he want me to do? And then, that conviction of, like, well, who am I to hold on to this for me? Because I want to do A, B, and C. Like, God, what do you want me to do? And when you start trusting him, you realize he's going to bless you. And I'm not saying prosperity gospel here by any means, but I'm just saying the blessing isn't financial. We talk so much about prosperity and shalom, but that's really about shalom's really about completeness and wholeness. And you and I were talking about that just before we started this. It's like, how are we going to be complete if we don't let God minister his word into our hearts about knowing that he's the one, it's all his. Let him show us how to steward it, and we're gonna be so much more blessed if we try to do it in our own strength, our own wisdom, right? I mean, so like I said, you've dealt a lot with that. Like, I don't know, just expound on that a little bit for us.
the yin and yang of ownership versus stewardship, I mean, that's the real struggle. And
Yeah.
yeah, I kind of liken it back to, I think it's actually more, you think back to like the fall, right? Adam and Eve in the garden, everything's good, and they decide to exit stage left. The fundamental, sin there is like pride, right? Like they wanted to be God. Same thing that got Satan booted out of heaven, right? He wanted to assume that position and be God, and it's like, nope, you're not God. And likewise, I think we, since Adam and Eve have been struggling with that same challenge of control, of being godlike, wanting to be a sovereign. So when we start thinking about money or business, I mean, I see it pop up. Like I remember really struggling when I was a business owner for years and years, where I'm like, oftentimes I'm like, man, I'm trying to build my own kingdom. Like I really wanted to exert sovereign control over this little kingdom of mine, and and so the Lord have to convict me of that, and kind of slap my hand and pull my eyes back to Him. Um, so I think that stewardship starts out with recognize, like, just being real with recognizing, hey, what do I have in my life that hasn't been given to me? Like the breath of my lungs, the education that I got, the family I was born into, the time and the history of man that I exist in, like where, like America, like, you know, everything that I have has actually been given to me. It's all a gift. Like my brain working properly to, process problems or like come up, whatever. Like it's all a gift, and that starts humbling my recognition of like, yeah, if I'm really being honest, like this is more God's doing than my own. Now He's always at work. Like He's made us who we are, and so like part of the gift is you know even having the capacity and the opportunity to exercise entrepreneurialism and leadership within a business context, like what a gift. That's awesome. Like, the gift to produce abundance, like that's a gift, like to create more than you need so that you can bless other people. Like that's awesome. And so I think it just depends on like being real and having input in your life, whether it's through reading the word, being in a church, having other brothers up in your foxhole, that can speak truth into your life, that keep recalibrating your perspective. Like, I'm 51, so every time I go to the optometrist, they're always like, is it A or B, B or C? And they're always like dialing it in, and it changes a little bit every year. And so it's a sad state of affairs, but that's what I'm dealing with. And I think that's really true for us spiritually. Like honestly, we need that corrective, constant corrective recalibration to be able to maintain perspective of what God might be calling me to, or just having a sensitivity to being open to asking. Like that's a big part too. So I don't know. I feel like, you know, that's the starting point of getting into thinking through and figuring out for us individually, like, all right, what's the demarcation between ownership and stewardship, and what might God be calling me to do as a result of that.
There's so much going on this topic. I know we could probably talk for another half an hour or more in some of this areas of generosity, but I appreciate your time. I want to be a steward of that of your time, and thanks for you being here. And like I said, I guess to our listeners, like I said, just if I hope this was valuable to where maybe it just jogged your memory, jogged your brain a little bit on just like Jay talked about, just let's take all this back to God. What does He want of us? Where's our heart? And I love that you said you get with a foxhole with your guys. Just hey, let's talk through some of this stuff and let's challenge one another, and then but let God ultimately land the plane for each one of us in these questions of generosity. And it's a journey. Like I think you said that too, Jay. Like, it's a journey. It's not this one and done. And just see how God progresses us in our faith on that. So
To that last point about having building a framework around yourself to be better, to follow more closely. Well, like for sure, being a regular attending member of a church really important, right? Um, having some accountability brothers is always key. For business owners, there's awesome organizations out there like C12, so that's for Christian business owners. So you're getting great curriculum and coaching along with a peer advisor group of other people that have opted in for similar reasons as you. And so that can be a fantastic, resource for, seeking out, hey, how does the Lord want me to live this stuff out that He's put in my life? So, yeah, it's like I wish there was a silver bullet. There ain't no silver bullets. Which again, back to like our design. Well, we're made to be dependent, and as a Type A business owner, I really recoil at that, but that's a good thing. It's like, hey, we're made to be dependent. It's okay to depend on God and not have all the answers and have to keep going to the source for step by step guidance. So, yeah, thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
thanks a lot, Jay, man. Brother, appreciate you. And to everyone else, we appreciate your time. Hey, before you go, two quick things. First, if you've been listening and wondering where you actually stand in these 6 Guidelight pathways as a leader, there's a free assessment and a free blueprint waiting for you. The assessment helps you see where you are right now, and the blueprint walks you through all 6 Guidelight pathways in detail. Both are free, both are worth your time. Find the link in the description or head to Guidelight Legacy and you'll find it there. Hey, and if something you heard today stirred something in you, don't let it stay quiet. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Like the episode if it's worth your time. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not because it helps me, but because it might be exactly what they're looking for. Thanks for being here. I'll see you on the next episode.